Muted.
Hi, my name is Sean McIntosh, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today for this webinar on taking back control of a Microsoft or Oracle audit. Lines will be muted during the webcast today, and questions will be answered at the conclusion of the presentation, as we will have a Q&A session. If you have any questions, please submit them via the GoToMeeting chat console, and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. We have two presenters today. Mike Austin leads the service delivery team at Method 180. Mr. Austin has successfully negotiated over $1 billion in Microsoft contracts over his career and heads our service delivery team. He has extensive experience with licensing the Office 365 offering and negotiating with Microsoft account teams. We are also pleased to be joined by Ed Ramirez, who is the founder and chief strategy officer at SLC Corporation. Mr. Ramirez is the foremost Oracle licensing expert with progressive experience in managing and strategizing on large-scale Oracle negotiations with an emphasis on cost reduction. Areas of expertise include project planning, strategy development, compliance resolutions, ULA negotiations, and certifications. With that, I'll turn things over to Mike and Ed to get the presentation started.
This is Mike Austin here. We're going to talk this afternoon about Microsoft and Oracle audits and what you can do about them. And we're going to look really at the how, what, and the why of an audit, and I'm going to speak specifically to some of the nuances of a Microsoft audit, and Ed's going to speak to the nuances of an Oracle audit. And we really wanted to set the stage before we kind of dive into the meat of the conversation this afternoon about why is it important to focus on audits. It's not so important to you, so to speak, but why are these things important to Microsoft? And why is it important as a client to kind of think through these things? What we're seeing in market is that audits and what Microsoft would call a software asset management engagement are on the rise. They're conducting these things more and more frequently. And most clients in the Microsoft side, we always tell people if you haven't been audited, it's only a matter of time. We believe that most enterprise companies are going to get audited or at least go through a SAM engagement once every 3 years or so. The reason for that is these are big revenue generators for Microsoft. I recently had an opportunity to talk to somebody that was pretty high up in this group at Microsoft, and I asked them what their objectives and goals were. And the one thing that kind of struck me as ironic was that of all the things that he listed, reducing compliance wasn't on his list. And I kind of asked him that question. I said, well, why don't you have an objective to reduce non-compliance to 30% to say 20%? What is the non-compliance rate out there? And he kind of looked at me and went, that's an interesting question, and then left it at that. So this really is, I think the key message is this really is about generating revenue. I know that's the fact for Microsoft. Ed, I don't know if there's anything specifically you'd like to say about Oracle here, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the Oracle environment, what we're constantly seeing, especially in the last, and I'll frame it this way, in the last 12 months has been a drastic increase in audits. Our business has transformed from being 80% helping customers just reduce costs overall to more of a 70% is defending customers from an audit. So a lot of the customers that are out there are either being threatened by an audit through sales conversations saying that there's an audit, an impending audit out there looming, or they're outright being audited by Oracle. And so it's something that has changed the climate at Oracle dramatically to where audit preparedness should be on the top of mind for all customers. As we go through this presentation, we're going to talk about why it is so important. Because customers don't run around saying, hey, I want to be out of compliance, but a lot of customers do say when that time comes, we'll address it. And we have a good idea that we're compliant, so we don't really have any big issues. But once we get through this presentation, we're going to talk about some of the pitfalls and some of the areas that I think are going to create some concern within customers that hopefully walk away from this call today with some proactive measures in their mind that they can take back to the office and do some preparedness that's going to basically save them millions of dollars.
Right. And I know for me, Ed, and we'll talk maybe Oracle here in a second, but I know on the Microsoft side, it's the same sort of thing. Our practice has really changed from driving cost out of Microsoft contracts, and we still a big part of our practice, but the audit defense and internal self-assessments and stuff have really grown over the last little while, and that's a direct result of Microsoft's activity there. But one of the things I get asked quite frequently is, what triggers an audit? Why did I get selected? And in the Microsoft world, I think there's a couple of points to make here. I think that there are some specific things that we believe leads organizations to an audit. Two of the more obvious ones, for instance, are if you are in an enterprise agreement and don't place a true-up, you submit what they call a zero true-up. We believe that's a trigger for an audit, which is unfortunate because a lot of organizations times are tough in a lot of segments of the get out there, and so maybe they're downsizing and they don't have a true up, but that triggers these things. The other thing is if you choose not to renew significant portions of your agreement, we think that triggers an audit as well. But what I tell people all the time is Microsoft really does these things in two kind of categories. One is an audit, where they trigger the audit clause in your contract, or the second is under a guise of what they call a software asset management engagement or a SAM engagement. And so what I say here is these two things are basically the same. Microsoft will position a SAM engagement as a friendly kind of self-check, and that is somewhat true, but what they do the minute that they get in the door is the same. They're going to run scripts in the network, they're going to inventory. So, they are done basically the same, and the difference really is around remedies. And what I mean by that is in an audit, Microsoft will, if you're found to be non-compliant by greater than 5%, they can charge you the fee of an audit. So whatever the auditors charged Microsoft, they can pass that cost on to you, whereas in a SAM, Microsoft funds it. The other thing is that if you are found to be non-compliant by that 5%, they can charge you list price plus 20% as a penalty to settle it, whereas under the SAM engagement, you're just, you place your order under the normal course of your contract, whether it's a true-up or whatnot. And so it really is around the remedies, I might charge the audit fee and whatnot. But there are a couple other things that we tell people because these SAM engagements, Microsoft has changed the language in their contracts that actually say in the true-up section that they can conduct a SAM engagement to validate your true-ups at any time. So they're actually expanding their audit language out of your master business agreement with them and putting it in the EA itself around true-ups. The one thing that we warn people is, 2 years ago I would have said the SAM was the way to go because it was friendly. It wasn't. Now, we kind of sit on the fence sometimes about that because you are forced under a SAM engagement to pass the raw data to Microsoft, and we're going to talk about why that's a challenge a little bit later. So just kind of tuck that in the back of your mind, and that that's a new thing that Microsoft is doing, where they're taking raw data up front versus some of the older ways of doing it, where they just you would work with their partner or themselves to get this done before they did that. Now, Ed, there are quite a few differences, I think, here between Microsoft and Oracle, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Even though we share a lot of commonalities when it comes to the audit from these two mega vendors, both Microsoft and Oracle, Oracle has a completely different process. And what triggers an audit within Oracle is very different than Microsoft. As Mike mentioned, there are some mechanical things that happen at Oracle where if you do certain things, it does trigger an audit. But the basic principle of what triggers an audit is basically lack of sales within an account. And who triggers the audit? We call it a nomination. So who nominates you for an audit is your Oracle account team, your salespeople, the people that are taking you out to lunch or dealing with your CIO or positioning new products within the account. Those are the people that are nominating you for an audit. It is a good cop, bad cop kind of routine. They nominate you for an audit, and then they come around and say, hey, I understand you were nominated for an audit. We had nothing to do with it. We'll help you out. We'll be the good guys. But the reality is you are nominated by your salespeople. And, one of the things that we like to talk about is within that nomination period and why do you get nominated, what are your rights within that nomination? And the rights are, the first part, and actually let me back up a little bit. Oracle doesn't play by the rules when it comes to audits. And let's make that perfectly clear. And the first example I'm going to cite is going to make that very clear. you're going to get nominated for an audit and you're going to receive a letter. It's going to go to a high-level executive, either CIO or CFO of the company, in which they're going to be notified that there's an audit. That notification letter is going to state that you have 3 days to respond to Oracle, in which they want to set up a meeting, go through Oracle server worksheets, and all the process. What are your rights? The first thing that we're going to say is that letter is incorrect. You have 45 days to comply. You have 45 days notice in which to reply. And those 45 days, even you might say, well, what's the difference? You're still going to get audited. 45 days gives you a lot of time to really check your environment and make sure everything is rock solid and you don't go into an audit blindly. And so there's a lot of rights that come from having an audit invoked. So Mike mentioned, in the Microsoft world, there's SAM engagements and there's actually audits. In the Oracle world, there's what we call soft audits. Soft audits do not require notice, and it's basically your salespeople saying, we need you to fill out an Oracle server worksheet. And most customers do that. The reality is that's a soft audit. They're auditing you, but you have no audit protection clauses at all. You're basically getting audited without you knowing and without you protecting yourself. So when Oracle asks you for, hey, can you please fill out this Oracle server worksheet? We need it by a week, within a week's time frame. You can always say, nope, I can't fill that information out. Your information is proprietary, and unless you're under audit, you don't need to provide Oracle with any information at all.
That's great advice, Ed. One of the things I know that I get asked as well is, who's actually going to audit me? Is it Microsoft or who's going to do the audit? And in the Microsoft world, Microsoft actually doesn't audit themselves. They actually use third parties, and those third parties range from one of the kind of big four accounting firms, Deloitte, KPMG, and Y, to they have a bunch of certified partners that they call SAM, or Software Asset Management Partners, and they actually have a competency that they train these people in to do these SAM engagements. So typically, whether it's an audit or a self-assessment, or sorry, a SAM engagement, you're going to encounter either an accounting firm or a SAM partner. The audits, they tend to be handled by the accounting firms, whereas the SAM engagements tend to be handled more by their SAM partners, although that's not a steadfast rule. We've seen both in either or. Now, Ed, I think this is different because as I understand it, Oracle only does the audits themselves, correct?
That's the way it used to be. So because Oracle audits are on the rise, Oracle traditionally did all audits internally. They did not use anybody else other than themselves, except in Europe. In Europe, they used accounting firms. But we just recently found, actually this month, that they have begun using companies like KPMG and other accounting firms to help them out with the load of audits. So Oracle's actually overwhelmed themselves with the amount of audits that they're actually doing, to the point where they're outsourcing and bringing in a company such as KPMG to help them perform the audits, while Oracle works them in the background. And so something that has completely changed in the last few weeks, actually, is going to impact everybody, because that way it just sends the message that they're auditing a lot of customers more than they have the resources to do internally.
That's actually interesting. So it does mean that in Oracle world, it sounds like they're definitely on the rise. And I think you had found, and I'm just going to throw it up here real quick, and I think this goes back to one of the earlier points that we had made, is that these audits are not about compliance; they're much more about licensing revenue. And you'd found a LinkedIn profile for one of the Oracle auditors. I don't know if there's anything you want to point out specifically in here, but we did paste it in here because I know there's some interesting stuff here. So.
Absolutely. So the reason why I felt it was important to put this in here is this is an actual snapshot of an Oracle auditor. And, we're holding the information just because this is a public forum that we're on. But this is the snapshot of their background. So when Oracle leads an audit, the first thing they disclose to you is, we're not tied to sales. We're an independent organization within Oracle. We don't have quotas, and we don't care about revenue. We're here to help you better manage your licenses. That is the spiel that you're going to get from Oracle auditors. But if you notice in these in the snapshot, principal licensing consultant at Oracle from June 2011 to present. in the middle of this section, I don't have a pointer, so I can't really point, but they are responsible for finding compliance and driving new license contracts. And they manage the relationship with the sales team. So this person actually went in there. Thank you, Mike, for doing that.
No problem.
And this person actually went into the link profile, which is public document. Anybody can get it. We're not even linked in. But they disclose that they have that information, that they actually close revenue, and their focus is to get revenue. There's a lot of blogs out there as well that actually put a number on them that Oracle auditors carry about a $5 million quota. So why is this important? Yeah, it's a little bit of dirt that you have on them, and it's important. But here's why it's important. We were on a call yesterday with one of the auditors and one of our accounts, one of our team, one of our clients. When the call began and Oracle began to deliver their spiel, which is we're completely neutral and all this, the customer was very quick to point them to this particular area and show them the actual article or the actual screenshot and said, we demand that you guys stop playing games and be transparent with us. And what that did is it set a stake in the ground that, you know what, you've got to play by the rules and everything has to focus on the contract. You can't go offline and do what you're going to do because we know what we're doing as clients. The meeting turned into a positive meeting because, again, we've been in a lot of meetings, but it turned into a positive meeting, and the people from Oracle were extremely apologetic during the whole process of the meeting, which turned the tables on them completely.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know that if we found one of these for a Microsoft auditor, it likely would be similar. We know that they are quoted. We know that they look for what I call a positive ROI. So that team has to drive revenue in order to exist. So it would be similar on the Microsoft side as well. But it's very good to note that when you are talking to the auditors or the SAM specialist or SAM engagement manager, as Microsoft calls them, that they are salespeople. That they are there to drive licensing revenue. In fact, we find I was at an event in New York City a few weeks back on a bunch of kind of ITAM type roles and people from that various community there. And one of the things that one of the points that I had made there was that it's unfortunate that as much as Microsoft likes to position that a SAM engagement is there to teach you how to manage licenses better, educate you on licensing, that the process that they run doesn't do any of that. It really is just about we're counting stuff and we want to know how many you're short and you're going to buy them. So I think they do miss the boat on terms of using this as an opportunity to educate and clarify some of the very confusing licensing rules they have in place. So I think now we'll talk a little bit about, you've got a SAM letter. Ed, I believe, made a point about making sure you put an NDA in place between you and the auditors. That's one of the things that we suggest as well on the Microsoft is kind of step one when you get that letter is get an NDA in place so that they can't share information with Microsoft prior to you being ready for them to do that. But, really, what is the process? And the process on the Microsoft side, and then I'll let Ed talk a little bit on the Oracle here, is the process really goes as follows. So Microsoft's going to come in and they're going to run discovery. And that discovery, depending on the auditor or the SAM partner, is really, the same, just the kind of maybe the tools that they use are just slightly different. And I do say tools here. But the first thing they're going to do is they're going to run scripts in your Active Directory. And so a lot of people will say to me, Mike, I have System Center Config Manager in place. It's a Microsoft tool. Why can't I just hand over the inventory out of SCCM and hand that to Microsoft and have them use that to determine, how much of what I have installed? And, I always tell them, it's kind of funny, isn't it, that Microsoft has a tool that does this, but they won't even accept the data out of it as a definitive audit source. And the reason for that, kind of, I guess, in their defense somewhat is that they can't tell if it's installed on 100% of your desktops, if it's reporting correctly on 100% of your desktops. So one of the first things that they're going to do is go and run scripts and take a look at Active Directory for the number of active devices and active users that are, within your AD. And that scares a lot of people because AD is never, in my experience in all these audits that I've done, it's never, clean. There's a lot of noise in there that needs to be worked through. So, as much as they won't accept SCCM, what they'll do is they'll go and look, okay, and say in SCCM you have 5,000 PCs in there, and in AD we see 6,000, so we'll accept the information on 5,000. We need to go find it on the other 1,000, and if we can't do that for whatever reason, we're going to extrapolate out to those 6,000 the number of projects in Visio and other stuff that's installed on them, and we definitely don't want that to happen. So they do come in, they run some scripts. They then, once they've taken your inventory, without much consultation with you, once they've kind of run and got the inventory, they'll create an estimated license position or an ELP. And really what that is the spreadsheet that shows the licenses that you own versus your deployments and any overages or underages. And then in there's usually a bunch of tabs for each product, so you can drive in and look and see what they're counting for Office and Windows and SQL and all that sort of stuff. The first one that comes back is very generic, and I'm going to talk about what we see in these things, but it's very high level. They basically, like I said, without much discussion with you, just kind of say, okay, here's what we see. We see that you have 5,000 of this and you need 5,000 licenses, and it just, just kind of starts from there. And then you work back and forth with them on what you see in that. Again, I'll go into a bit of detail on this here in a second. And you basically negotiate a settlement. So it really is a discovery, creation of this license position, and a settlement. Now, Ed, I think it's fairly similar with Oracle, although there are some differences, right?
It is very similar. What's different is there's a lot of smoke and mirrors and trickery within the Oracle side. So Oracle does go through the process of discovery. They go in there and try and uncover as much as they possibly can. Then they will run scripts on your systems. So here's the thing about Oracle and their scripts, okay? And this is a big one for people to take away with them today. These Oracle scripts that Oracle is going to provide to you have an embedded licensing agreement in them. And any company who has a small legal team within their group or an extensive legal team can basically dispute the fact that, why is Oracle asking you to run scripts in which you guys have to agree to additional licensing terms for their benefit? So in the moral of the story here is you don't have to run the Oracle scripts if you push back on Oracle, because Oracle is basically saying, run this program, agree to our terms, agree to all the licensing terms that are in there, and we're going to benefit from it. And so, again, this creates a legal situation for your team to not run the scripts, because the scripts will get data. And here's the problem with running the scripts. You might say, well, Ed, what's the problem? What are we hiding? We're an honest company. Absolutely, and I respect that, and that's how we do business. But Oracle scripts are flawed, and they come up with false positives all the time. So if you run these scripts on your database servers, it's going to come up that partitioning is being utilized. Well, yes, partitioning is a system process, and partitioning is going to trigger a positive. However, you guys did not buy or use the partitioning option. So now you're in a battle with Oracle to demonstrate to them that you do not owe them for partitioning. But Oracle just submitted you guys with a finding that you owe them $1 million because you're using partitioning. And so the scripts create a bunch of problems that we recommend not getting into. Oracle does not have elaborate tools. They do not have discovery tools. They do not have any sort of sniffing software. These scripts are, run these scripts on these machines and get the output back to us. They don't have anything that they deploy within the network that will scan everything. They're very archaic in the way they gather the information. They will create a licensing position just like the Microsoft side and go from there. Now here's the kicker on the negotiation and settlement. Oracle's approach is to shock and awe your executives. So what happens is after the audit is almost complete and they have the findings, they're going to send those findings to you, the audit team. They're also going to send it to the CFO, the CIO, and every other C-level person they can with a number such as $20 million, $30 million. We've seen this a lot, and I'm not lying when I say these numbers. When the CFO, CIO, or anybody get anything over a $5 million bill due within 30 days, it's pretty shocking. And everybody goes into panic mode, and everybody goes into recovery mode, and into negotiation mode, and freak out mode is what we call it. And so what happens is They send this finding. By the way, it's a preliminary report that is labeled final report, which is wrong. And again, they don't play by the rules. So now you guys as a team, the client as a team decides that they're going to negotiate this. So they're going to take that $20–30 million finding and negotiate it down. Oracle all along knows that the most they want to get from you is probably $3–4 million, which is bogus to begin with. But that they're happy with that forecast. They don't expect to get the full 20 or 30. And so your team goes into negotiation mode. You guys negotiate it down to, let's call it $4–5 million. Everybody feels happy. But the reality is you overpaid, because a lot of these findings are flawed. And once we get into some further slides, we're going to talk about the actual percentage of how these findings are flawed. And so what we see over and over within customers is, oh yeah, they came in and they found like we were out of compliance by $20 million, but we did a great job negotiating, got it down to like $5 million, and everybody was happy. And then after we get done reviewing all that, we realized that they probably shouldn't have paid no more than $100,000 for that finding. But if they don't know the information, if they don't know the Oracle process, Oracle makes it very, very easy for themselves to just claim any sort of finding. It's a very brutal game that they play.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ed. And I actually call it in the Microsoft world, I call it, because they're not doing it themselves, it's the auditors. I basically think that there's a slight difference here between Microsoft and Oracle. And what I mean by that is, in the Microsoft world, I don't believe that the auditors are kind of, trying approaches where, hey, we found 20 million and we know you're only going to get one, although that does end up being the end result, a similar sort of thing. But I think that the auditors take a very conservative approach to how they review the data. They're not going to make assumptions. They're not going to make any interpretations. So it's just, this is what we see in the data. This is what the data says to us. We don't know your environment. We don't know any of the kind of stories that go with it. So here's our findings. And, that really leads us to kind of what we see. This, in these audits or even SAM engagements is basically, if you were found to be 1 million out of compliance, really what ends up happening is 50% of it, or about $500K in this case, will just be will be wrong. And that part of that is that conservative assumptions from the auditors. Part of it is that they apply the wrong licensing rules, and some of it is that they're just looking at the wrong contract language and not applying the right rules to you, so to speak. And so what do I mean by that? A great example is if you take SQL Server, each version from 2000 has different licensing rules associated with. So 2000, 2005, 2008, 8R2, 12, and 14 all have different rules around virtualization, active-passive rules, server mobility, so all these things. And so what they do is they typically come in and they just start with today. We're here in November 2015, so SQL Server 2014, we're going to apply those licensing rules. Well, depending on the licenses and when you bought them and what your entitlements are, you may be able to use, say, 2005 that had unlimited virtualization, depending on the licenses that you owned. So, there's lots of different assumptions that they make, but they tend to just come in and apply what's going on today. Another great example of this is an enterprise agreement for Office and Windows Desktop OS is based on qualified devices. We'll set Office 365 aside for this conversation, but it's based on qualified devices. But it does have an exception that says if it's an industry device or a line of business machine, you don't have to count them, and those are things like POS. It's very vague. And so a lot of the times, take a manufacturer, shop floor machines, monitoring equipment and the pressure and torque, or nursing stations, or medical carts in a hospital environment. There's all kinds of scenarios where these industry devices exist where, for various reasons, you wouldn't want to have to count them for Windows and Office. The auditor is just going to say, we found 5,000 devices, you need 5,000 Office licenses, but you're excluding 1,000, and they're not going to make an assumption here. So they just start with 5,000. You need to know how to properly document that 1,000 shouldn't be counted, and you can get those pulled out. But it's just, I just call it wrong. It's just stuff that they haven't asked questions. They're just making, broad assumptions. And then you get into this 30% that is, or 300K, where it's open to interpretation. And these are kind of the gray areas of licensing, right? So these are things that we know we can do it, or Microsoft has told us that you can interpret it this way, and so that's the way that we've done it. But it's not 100% clear in the product use rights or the contract, and so an auditor is definitely not going to make an interpretation of this. They're going to be conservative in their approach. And so, an example may be you define test and development servers one way, you're licensing those with MSDN, and they're just not sure whether those should be called test and development servers. So they're going to say, well, you need to go talk to Microsoft about these, and we're going to park those and we're going to include those in your license counts and our findings, but go have a discussion with Microsoft on those, because eventually at some point in time this gets handed off from the auditor to Microsoft. And then, about 20%, maybe sometimes more, is correct. We basically, we're anticipating that, and thank you, Microsoft, for, validating our true-up for us. But the problem, and what we see, is that most of the times the auditors find these 1 million, you have a couple of conversations with them, you're not sure how to document the rules that you're applying, you don't know how to document the interpretation, and so the 1 million findings get sent off to Microsoft. And basically, the frustration for clients is you need to negotiate in that gray area, that 300,000, and Microsoft will give the 500,000, pretty quickly, and then tell you that, hey, we're not doing anything on that other 300 because we've already given you 500,000 in concessions, and those really weren't concessions. So it becomes this kind of roundabout thing. So, and is it the same for Oracle? I know you said they kind of start really high expecting low, but is there anything you want to point out here on the Oracle side?
That's the big difference, Mike, is in the Oracle side, they like to start out very high. In here on the presentation is conservative assumptions. The assumptions on the Oracle side are always wrong and in their favor, so that way they can work their way back. And so the second biggest problem is wrong licensing rules applied. Again, Oracle's very used to saying, here's what our findings is, here's how much you owe us, here's your salespeople, go work out a discount. They're not really used to customers, pushing back and saying, well, what are our licensing rules, and what licensing rules did you apply? One example is a customer was told that they needed to license their entire disaster recovery, and it was not licensed correctly. And so that was their finding, right? Because in today's world, yeah, that is correct. But the customer had a 2003 Oracle contract in which they had free disaster recovery licenses, because that's the way it used to be pre-2007. And so the customer was using the failover methodology. Oracle was claiming that today's rules applied when it was 2003 rules that should have applied and governed that particular finding. And so even though the customer was claiming a $1 million, Oracle was claiming a $1 million finding, the customer was able to demonstrate through their contract that they were licensed correctly. And so wrong licensing rules is always a big problem. The contract language, the way it's interpreted by the auditors, is a problem as well. But I do agree 100% with, you should just take a safe assumption that 50% of the audit findings is going to be wrong. And a lot of it is purpose, and a lot of it is just errors on their part. And then the other 30% will be interpretation and how they actually view your contract. Because remember, an audit is a contract activity. It has to be focused on the contract. What are the contract rules? What does the contract state? Not what Oracle's been doing for the last 15 years, which is what one of the auditors recited the other day. She basically just said, well, this is how we've been doing it for 15 years. Well, that's great that you've been doing it for 15 years that way, but let's do it according to our contract.
Yeah, that's a huge point, and it's very, especially I know in the Microsoft world, they change their contracts every 3 months, so the language changes, and slight changes in language can have major changes in how you count, or how they could view you should be counting, even though older contracts may govern it. So it's a very good point. I thought we'd talk a little bit about how to handle the audit, because this is one of the things that we get asked all the time is, okay, I've got this audit, I know I'm going to have to face it, but what should I do? Should I just go dark and not talk to Microsoft? Should I just hand over all my data? And I think this is worth spending a little bit of time on. One of the things that we tell people all the time with Microsoft is don't go dark on them. Don't go dark on Microsoft and don't go dark on the auditors. You need to communicate with them, although you'll want to control that communication and control the audit process. But make sure that you communicate how you want to do that, and that the timelines are your timelines, not timelines artificially placed on you by Microsoft and things like that. So in an extreme case, we had one where an IT manager was given an audit letter or SAM letter. They completely ignored it for 6, 7, 8 months. And Microsoft just took the client straight to court from there. Just because they went dark, they kind of did the ostrich thing and stuck their head in the ground and ignored it. So we definitely don't advocate that. We do advocate open communication with them, but controlled communication. The other key thing is, the data is the key, and get it and know your facts. And what I mean by that is, because they're just going to come in and look at the data and say, this is what the data says to us, this is how we're going to interpret it. You want to understand your data better than they understand it. So, try, and if you are getting one of these things, maybe try and get a couple of weeks ahead of them, run a self-assessment, see what you see in the data, prepare your stories, as I call it, to explain the data. A great example of this was we had a retailer that we were working with that had a mix of device and user cals in the Microsoft world, where at the corporate head office and kind of their corporate employees were licensed with user cals because they had PCs and smartphones and tablets. But in the retail environment, the employees only checked email on a couple of PCs in the store, so they had device-based licensing. And so the auditors basically came in and said, hey, we see 10,000 users, you need 10,000 user cals, you don't have it. And they didn't have a well-documented story around how they were managing device cals, and it was a large fight to get the auditors off of that and recognize all the cals that they had and that they were compliant here. So making sure you know how to explain that stuff and kind of having that, I call it documented, is important. The other thing, at least in the Microsoft world, is to make sure that when you get that findings of $1 million, that you negotiate out that $500,000 before it gets handed off to Microsoft. So then your negotiation with Microsoft is from 500 to 200, not 1 million to 200. So I think that is an important fact. Ed, what's your thoughts on this as it relates to Oracle?
So again, very transparent here, and it's basically the same thing. Do not go dark on the auditors. As much as I create, I talk about the aggression of Oracle within audits. Going dark on the auditors does cause a lot of problems, and we don't advocate going dark on them. What we do recommend is that you continually have activities. They don't have to be in-person meetings or anything, but just constant email flow, constant conversations to make sure that they understand that you've acknowledged the audit, the audit is going to take place, and meantime, you can buy yourself time and get your ducks in a row. I totally agree, data is key, and it's so important that you understand the data yourself. The one thing, again, we see it over and over and over again, is the customer doesn't really quite understand the data, and they hand it over to Oracle for interpretation. That's their validation method. Here, they asked for all this data. We gave it to them. Now we're waiting for the Oracle report to come back. If you don't understand the data, there could be things that are erroneous there. You could be over-licensed in a lot of areas that they're not going to pinpoint to you. Why is that important? Because if you're short in one area, but you over-licensed in another, you could fill those gaps with the overages that you have, but they don't show you those things because you yourself don't understand the data. The story is extremely important. What story you give Oracle is going to make the difference between them feeling comfortable about the fact that you know your data or the fact that you don't know what you're talking about, and it makes them even more suspicious. And they're very inquisitive, and they do get very suspicious. Like, why did you buy those e-business suite users at this time without any database licenses to support them? Why did you do that? How did that happen? So those questions come up. And so, again, knowing your rights, understanding your data, and don't go dark on the auditors. Have a continual flow of communication with them is key for these events.
That's great, and I think that kind of dovetails nicely into kind of, now we've got these findings. What do we do? We're kind of done going through data discovery with them. The thing I tell everybody is, at some point, typically once it gets handed off in the Microsoft case from the auditors to Microsoft, it really is a negotiation, and you should approach it as such. You know, I tell people all the time. I say it's sad, but it's true that at the end of the day, it really doesn't come about being, you know, compliant. That's not what the end result is. It's the dollar amount that you're going to cut a check for to Microsoft. So you need to approach it as a negotiation. You need to have a plan in place. You need to anticipate Microsoft's responses. One of the things that Microsoft loves to do is play off on, you know, your account team against the SAM engagement manager, against the auditors, maybe even against your reseller. And so there's a little bit of finger pointing that goes on, and it's, you know, well, we can't give you that concession, Mr. Customer, because the audit team won't let us do it. You know, your account team talking to you, and you go to the audit team, and they're like, well, we can't do that because the business desk or your account team needs to approve it. So it just becomes this roundabout circle. So, you know, we always say make sure that you have an escalation plan in place to move beyond, say, your account team and their sales manager if need be, because otherwise these could just be going round and around. I mean, it's not uncommon for us to have heard of people or that are, you know, working with Microsoft 9, 12, 15 months on these things with no resolution in sight. So, you know, making sure that you approach it as a negotiation, they have a negotiation playbook or plan is very important. Ed, similar on the Oracle side, or?
Yeah, so a negotiation playbook is key. And as you mentioned, Mike, it is a negotiation in the final round. It becomes a negotiation. Even if you're 100% out of compliance and it's been acknowledged and the numbers are true, it becomes a negotiation, and it is a negotiation. So knowing how to negotiate this process is very, very important. And so always refer back to the contract on this and negotiate this transaction and make sure that you have a plan in place. So one of the examples I'd like to bring up is just that whenever a customer is found that they owe a certain amount of money, Oracle's going to bring up that they owe past due support on that as well. So that's a big thing in the negotiation that Oracle will play in there. So not only do you own the software, you know, in the Microsoft world, as Mike mentioned, if you're over by 5% or so, there's penalties attached to it. Oracle doesn't have that. They just want to get their revenue that you owe them, and they will position back due support fees. So in the back due support fees, in my 25 years plus that I've been doing this, both internally at Oracle and externally now as a service provider for the last 14 years, Oracle has never enforced the back due support. So it's a given that you can negotiate that off. Now you're just going to focus on the actual numbers that you owe, and discounting is wide open at that point. They will play the game of, well, you were found out of compliance, so it's list pricing minus a fair discount. But at the end of the day, this is a revenue activity, so you have all the leeway in the world to negotiate this. And as has been mentioned earlier, the negotiation can take several months. Don't feel like because they said it's 30 days, you have 30 days to resolve this, you guys have to write a check in 30 days. That is never the case. Yeah, the 30 days is put down, but the reality is if you haven't gone dark on them, if there's negotiation and fluid contact going on, you could have up to 6 months to negotiate this. And every quarter end at Oracle is an opportunity to negotiate. Even Gartner will tell you that. So every time there is a quarter end, you have that opportunity to really negotiate the findings and go to Oracle and say, hey guys, this is too much, you know, we need to negotiate this, and they will negotiate, and it is a negotiation all the way through.
Yeah, those are great points, Ed. I think, you know, with that, I think we've kind of gotten through the, you know, what, why, how of audits with Microsoft and Oracle, and I know that I've seen a few questions kind of coming through the chat here. So maybe with that, we'll open up, Sean, if you want to maybe ask a couple of the questions of Ed and myself, and we can run with those and answer those for the next few minutes before we wrap up here.
Sure, that was great, guys. I think everyone found that very useful. I was wondering, Mike, would you mind moving forward just to the contact information slide? Because I just wanted to say, if folks, you can submit questions, and we've been receiving them through the presentation, through the chat console. But if you're more comfortable speaking to Ed or Mike directly, this is how you can reach them. And I'm speaking for the guys here, but I know they're more than happy to spend some time on a call with any of you to address any questions you prefer to have addressed in private. So I guess the first question I have, and I think this person, this came through, Ed, as you were speaking right at the end there, and I could almost feel the person typing very hard as they typed this. But Oracle told us the audit's not negotiable and won't budge.
That's the total question, Sean?
That is the total question. Is this true? Because you're saying it's negotiable. They're saying it's not in terms of Oracle.
Okay, that is very to the point. I love it. So here's the answer to that question. The audit is 100% negotiable. So here's how to address this point. Okay. Number one, there's many aspects of the audit, and what part of the audit is negotiable? The fact that they can audit you, is that negotiable? Well, that can be postponed and pushed around. If you guys have year-end deadlines that you're trying to meet, it's impossible to do an audit. So even the timing of the audit is negotiable. The other part that is, because this is a very broad question, what part of the audit is negotiable? Well, let's talk about the scope. Oracle wants to audit your entire state. They want to audit everything from applications down to the core technology to middleware. That is 100% negotiable. So basically what you're saying is either you're going to audit me on applications, you're going to audit me on database, or something else. So everything from the timing of the audit to how the audit is done is going to be a negotiation without any questions, even if they say it's not negotiable. I believe their point is it's not negotiable is their right to audit. They do have that contractual right. And I hope I made that clear, and this person understands what I mean by that.
Well, I think that was good, Ed. And again, if we haven't properly answered the question, please reach out to Ed directly. His contact information is on the screen. So the next question I have, this one came in fairly midstream through the presentation. Microsoft is saying that I have to true up to the high water mark for the year, but I thought I counted at the anniversary dates for my true up. I'm confused.
This is a good one. So yeah, we see this quite often, and it plays out a lot in the SAM engagements, because what most people have operated under the premise, and Microsoft sells it this way as well, is that an EA, I basically look at if I sign it January 1st, I look at what I have January 1st next year, and if I have more than I bought, I true up, and so it's a once-a-year thing. This kind of goes to what I was saying earlier, where they slip small changes into the contracts that can have detrimental or big impact. And so I don't know if it was about a year and a half ago, maybe a little bit more than that now, they actually slipped some language in that basically says that additional products, you have to keep your counts monthly and true up to the highest count. So that they're trying to apply that both to the desktop now and to additional products. And a lot of organizations struggle with that because it kind of flies in the face of what the enterprise agreement is once a year I count my licenses, and Microsoft positions that. But they do have language in the contract that says it's the high watermark. And so, you want to be careful about that language. You want to, you can push back on it. How do you know what the high watermark was? You never kept records. How would they know? And things like that. So there are ways to get around that, but the contract does allude to that, and it really depends on what contract you're on, because some of the older contracts don't have that language where the newer ones do.
Okay, great. We have one more Microsoft one, which is, it looks like this customer is being audited, and they're saying the auditors are refusing to look at my SQL licenses. They say I owe licenses because I'm in an SCE. Why do I owe when I have enough licenses to cover my usage?
Okay, so I think if I peel this question back, it sounds like what they're asking here is, I'm in an audit or a SAM engagement. I think I have enough licenses, but because I have this SCE or the server and cloud enrollment, the auditors or Microsoft are saying I owe licenses. I think that's what they're saying, and I understand why. So the server and cloud enrollment is an all or nothing enrollment for your SQL licenses if you have them included in there. So what that means is basically 100% of my SQL footprint needs to be licensed through the SCE enrollment. I can't use old entitlements to cover my SQL footprint if I have an SCE. So I actually had a scenario like this recently with a client where we were doing a self-assessment, and their SCE and their EA was coming up for renewal in about 6 months. And I actually had to go back to them and tell them, look, according to the language in the SCE, you owe $1.2 million in SQL true-ups, but 6 months plus 1 day from now, you're 100% compliant. And it was just that. They didn't have all their licenses for SQL included in the SCE. They had a bunch of older entitlements that they could use. And so, that's what Microsoft is playing here, is that the SCE is an all or nothing approach to SQL. You can't use older licenses that aren't included in the contract. Now, that's at the high level. There are things that you potentially can do depending on the environment, but I think that's probably what Microsoft is pushing on here.
Okay, thank you. Next question looks like this is for Ed. Oracle LMS keeps asking us for the same data over and over. We've provided the data, and they claim they want to see it again, and they keep having us run the scripts. What should I do?
Okay, so once again, you got to point back to the contract and go back to the contract and have Oracle show you where it says that they have the right, unilateral right to basically run scripts within your systems repeatedly. There is no wording in the contracts. It doesn't exist. So basically, the way to diffuse these things is always use the contract. At this point, you don't want to negotiate it. You want to point to the contract. And the fact that the contract is silent on that gives you a better leverage to be able to tell Oracle, look, we've provided the data. It's a snap in time. It's a snapshot in time of when the data was collected. The data changes. Servers change. We can't continue to give you refreshed data. It becomes unreasonable. So when you start saying and going down the road that it's an unreasonable and it's becoming a disruption of your business, that's the one section of your contract that does exist where it says that Oracle, such audit will not unreasonably disrupt your business. And when they begin to do that and realize that these extra activities are doing that, they will back off and not ask you to run the data again and again because they're just looking for something.
Okay, that sounds good. I think from our perspective, that wraps up the questions that we had today. I just want to thank both Mike and Ed for sharing their time and their expertise with everyone today. So guys, did you have anything you wanted to add before we close up today?
I think I would just say if anybody has any questions that we didn't address today, feel free. My email's on the screen as well as my number. Feel free either to drop me a line or give me a shout, and I'm happy to answer anything that we didn't cover today.
Absolutely. And again, this is something a very open forum, so there is no contracts or anything involved or sales. It's just if you have any questions, let us know, and we'll be more than happy to help you.
Okay, great, guys. Well, I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to attend today, and thank you once again. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.